English language teaching under the covers.
Hello and welcome to the ELT Under the Covers podcast. Today we have a teacher trainer, and a teacherpreneur. She is the co-founder of TEFL Horizons. She runs a blog, runs regular webinars, and offers a range of online English teacher certification courses. Additionally, she hosts the podcast, the excellent podcast, Expand Your Horizons. She's come to broaden our horizons. Welcome to the show, Shannon Felt.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here with both of you.
We're really happy to have you on. Okay, so as normal, we're going to dial it back, and if you can, take us back into your time and let us know your origin. How did you come to, this new horizon? Sorry, I can't help it. I can't help myself.
I love it. I'm all about it. So keep it coming. Yes. So I think like a lot of us in this industry, I started with a love of traveling and kind of fell into teaching from there. So also probably like a lot of us in this industry, I graduated. So my undergraduate degree is in English language and literature.
Mm-hmm.
So lots about language, but not really anything to do with teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute I graduated, I had this sort of major existential crisis of, wow, I just realized that I know a lot about Shakespeare and nobody cares, right? So, like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
What am I qualified to do in any way? To support myself in the world. And so, like many people do, I took kind of a find myself backpacking trip through Europe that summer after I finished school, fell in love with the idea of traveling, saw other people, on my travels making it work. And I thought, okay, I could do this. I know a lot about language. I love language. I love English. Maybe I could teach English and do this traveling thing for a year. And because I knew absolutely nothing about teaching and am very much an introvert at heart, the idea of trying to do that without any sort of training was terrifying to me, thankfully.
Yeah.
So I did a CELTA course, and really shortly into the course, I think something just kind of clicked for me. And I said, oh, I like this. I get this. And it wasn't just about traveling anymore. It was actually about the teaching.
Can you expand on what it is that clicked? Because everyone's got a little different thing. I'm just wondering what yours was.
Something that really stood out for me. So something that my dad had always told me was, in trying to give his fatherly advice, he always said, you need a skill, not knowledge. You need a skill, something that you can do, that you can demonstrate, that's always in demand, so that you're not just replaceable, by just anybody, like that you have something that people need you to be able to do. And I didn't really understand what he was saying. I was like, yeah, whatever, Dad. Like, I like reading books. I'm going to study English,
Yeah.
which I don't regret that. But it wasn't until the CELTA, my CELTA experience, and it wasn't just because it was CELTA, but it was the first time that I felt like I'd actually been taught to do something. Like it was this practical skill, and it was taught in this very practical, hands-on way that suddenly I said, I get it. This is what I can now do something that not just anybody can do, and I can demonstrate that ability. And so, yeah, something kind of clicked there, and it was a very different way of learning than I'd ever experienced. And I came out of it with this very different feeling of, this is how learning should be. And I guess that was my first experience with training, maybe more than just learning. So that's, I think, what it was. In addition to the fact that I just happened
teaching can be
like
quite
teaching.
vocational,
Yeah.
in a way, which is something that I never expected. But the more that you learn, the more you realize that you are honing skills, and
Yep.
and there's so many different ways of going about it as well, which is what
Absolutely.
we kind of get into with this our YouTube channel. We look into the different methodologies and how people approach it.
It's absolutely a skill, isn't it? And we talk sometimes
Mhm.
about how you can often make an analogy between learning a language and learning a musical instrument, in that you do have theory, and the theory can be useful to certain people at times,
Right.
but overall it is a skill, and it definitely requires practice, and there's all kinds of elements of practice, and you can practice on your own and become pretty good. But sometimes it helps to have a second pair of eyes to say, oh, you've got a bit of tension in your shoulder there, why don't you drop that down, and hey, have you seen this new chord, and things like that. I very much think that there's a lot of analogies there, and training your ears, another one as well.
That's
Seems
true.
to fit both musicianship and language learning.
So true. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, that's where I think the spark kind of began of becoming someone who loved teaching and not just, it wasn't just a means to an end anymore, I guess I could say.
Hmm.
So after that, I went to Budapest, Hungary, and I taught there. I thought that I would go for a year and then see where that took me. And at that time, I think I still thought that I was going to go and teach for a year and then start my real career,
Ha ha
and then
ha.
8 and 5 years later, I thought, gee, maybe this is my real career. And I did my Delta while I was in Budapest at IH Budapest, which was amazing, and then started training teachers at the language school where I was working. Started running their teacher training program, and then started to feel ready to come back to the States. So I started hunting around for jobs, and I actually applied for a DOS job, a director of studies job in New York. And thankfully, the owner of the school reached out to me and she said, you are a good candidate for this position, but after interviewing you, I feel like you talked so much about training and your love of training. Is there any chance you'd rather be a CELTA trainer? And I said, yes, actually, that's what I want. I just didn't know that that was something you were advertising. So they trained me up as a CELTA trainer. And yeah, was a CELTA trainer full time for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. So I was doing like back to back CELTAs, 13 courses a year sometimes.
Whoa.
Um, it was a lot of
That's a
CELTA,
busy center.
but yeah, full
Where did you
time.
say that was?
So I trained up in New York, but then they'd hired me for a full time position in Washington, D.C.
Ah,
So I
right.
was in
Okay.
Washington, D.C. for about 4 years, and I worked for Teaching House, if you're familiar with,
Right.
they they do CELTAs. So they have a couple of like pop-up centers that just spring up at various locations in the summer. So usually I'd go off to one of those for a couple months every summer and make sure those courses were running smoothly. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot, but it was a lot of fun. And I learned so much from training, hundreds of teachers through CELTA. And then eventually thought, okay, this is something I still love training, but this is starting to feel a bit restrictive schedule wise, and went freelance. So it was freelance training and started TEFL Horizons, and we can get into that as well. But here I am.
That's fantastic. It's such a wealth and depth of experience. I love that you were doing so many. It sounds terrible when I say it. Love that you were doing so. You've done so many CELTAs in such a little period of time. But now,
Yeah.
it always for me, it's always the more that you kind of do stuff, the more it hones you down, and more it really refines your ideas around it. Can you share any sort of ideas or thoughts that you had around the CELTA, like what makes it such a? Because I find it to be one of the best like introductory courses for teachers. I know a lot of the teachers that I've come across over the years when I've been traveling, that they end up doing just like these random TEFL weekend
Yeah.
courses. Like I did. That's what I did. And then as soon as I did the CELTA, I was like, why didn't I do that? And then I was like, oh, this is the actual starting point for a
Right.
teaching career. Can you, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever comes to mind.
So I don't know at this point that it's kind of the be all end all anymore. I still love the CELTA course. I think the key with CELTA is that it is so hands-on that there's really no way to learn better than just by doing it, and being part of this program that's going to give you the tools not just to do it and say, okay, I did it, but also reflect on it. You really need to be guided through this process of reflection, like, okay, well, what happened in the lesson? Why do you think that happened? What could you do differently next time? And that's the kind of learning that we don't really get, I think, growing up for most of us in our kind of educational experiences. So there's that aspect, and then the aspect of someone who has been specifically trained in a certain way to give you feedback on what's happening and sort of coach you through doing something differently next time based on what your teaching style is and your personality is too. So I guess it is kind of a
Mm,
coaching experience,
Mm.
the same way that you would be coached to play an instrument or play a sport. And I think as long as you can find sort of CELTA alternatives, but as long as you're getting that really practical coaching experience, I think that's the key.
Do you,
um, mhm.
do you think that the CELTA is somewhat, because I mean Neil was mentioning it as a starting point, right? And it is good for that. But something I've always felt about the CELTA, and I'm not sure exactly how prescriptive Cambridge English are with it and how much it varies centre to centre.
Yeah.
However, one of the things that I've seen that seems to be fairly unanimous about the CELTA is that it's quite prescriptive in the way that teachers, in the kind of methodology that teachers should teach.
Hmm.
And it's almost in a way trying to form kind of a template teacher. Here's your PPP template teacher, good to go, who can take a little grammar point or a communicative activity and build a lesson up that will make people happy after an
Yep.
hour or 90 minutes. What do you think about that? Is that center dependent, or do you think it's kind of built into it?
I think it's pretty built into it. I think maybe more than anything, it's a bit trainer dependent, because I think it's the CELTA in general, I feel, is more trainer dependent than center dependent because centers often have different trainers who've never even worked together cycling through them. So that's an aside. And I don't think there's anything bad about that necessarily, but I do
mhm.
think you'll get trainers that are much more going to coach the candidates on, wow, let's really think outside the box, and others who are going to say, you need to tick these boxes and that's it. Um, I do feel that in general, CELTA is very prescriptive, and I actually don't feel that that's a bad thing, mainly because if we have new teachers, I think it's important to encourage teachers to experiment and do the research and try different things and mess up. The thing with that is that with brand new teachers, 90% of what they do is going to be messed up if it's not, kind of giving them this template to follow.
Mm.
So I think
Yeah.
it's sort of that adage of you have to know the rules before you can break them. And
Right.
you have to really know the rules well before you can break them. And then you
Yeah.
can start to have fun. It's like music. You got to learn the basic chords before you're going to be able to improvise and have it sound good.
Yeah.
Because you got to know the principles behind it. So that's my starting point with that, I think.
Yeah, the way that you're talking about it now, it makes me think of like a driving test. How everyone always says, "Oh, do your driving test and then really learn how to drive afterwards."
Yeah.
And I think that's all well and good. However, I do think it would be nice if that was presented a little bit more, because I think that some of the thinking from the CELTA kind of bleeds into the industry in a way that people will look at stuff or look at a class and say, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that. Do this instead. This is the way you do it with a CELTA kind of thing."
Right.
And I think that's unfortunate. And it's not. I mean, it's not kind of overbearing. You don't find it everywhere. You do get, you get centers and you get people and you get, a lot of outside the box thinking as well. Um, but for me, it wasn't until I didn't do a delta. I did a dip T sol,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until I did that I really kind of began to embrace that and started to defend my own teaching practices as well, and sort of
Mhm.
say, well, not everything needs to be PPP, and maybe you can make an argument for the occasional use of L1 in this situation or something
Right.
like that.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's where I do think you need that training either way. Because at the end of it, I think as long as you can point back to the students and answer this question of, well, what are the students getting out of this? How is this benefiting the students? Then there are lots of different things you can do. Um, and that's something that also needs to be kind of practiced and that you need training for, I think. Because that's where I think without the framework, maybe that's one of the benefits of having these kind of CELTA frameworks and this prescriptive way of thinking is it's sort of drilling into you. We're doing this for this reason.
Mhm.
Is it the only way to do it? Absolutely not. But this is one way that works because here's what the students are getting out of it. And so it sort of forces you to think the why behind it in terms of the student's perspective. And once you've got that, then I think it's easier to go into, okay, well, actually, maybe there is an argument for L1 here because here's what the students are getting out of it. And here's how it's helping them. Yeah, I'm losing my train of thought of it, but I think that's where I come from with it. And if the teacher doesn't have that foundation, then they'll do something and you'll ask them, well, why did you do that? Well, because I thought it would be fun. Well, because I wanted to try. It's like, well, it's fun for you, but how is it helping the students?
It's almost like
language ability.
It's almost like it introduces kind of like the framework. Definitely, it gives you a framework, especially with the structures, but also it gives a lot of like a standardizing of jargon or lexi or whatever to be able to discuss what's going on in the classroom, because there are these things that happen within the class and that you're like, I can't quite put it into words, and the CELTA kind of starts to introduce terms that you can then use to go online or to talk with other teachers, and you're instantly like, oh yeah, an effective filter, that's what it is. Why didn't I not know? But then you're like, wait, hold on, I'm assigning words to this, but I'm not supposed to assign words to grammar points or something like that. I don't know. No, it's a terrible joke, inside joke. But one of the things that really heartened me when you were just talking about the CELTA training was how you would do the training and you would give feedback, but also it sounded like you gave more personalized direction with your feedback into maybe this is how you could teach. Because, with my CELTA experience, although it was great, it was very, as we say, prescriptive, but it kind of sounds like the direction that you took it, you did that element, but also you were like, maybe push your teacher students into different directions to so because what I find is often people go through that CELTA and they go through the prescription of it and they end up losing that spark that that was doing so well for them, because one of the things that we don't often talk about is we have all these backpacker teachers that go out there and they do great and students learn. So there's something in there. There's a rough diamond, but then they kind of go through a CELTA, and then it's like, well, you stop doing what it is that was really engaging the students.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I almost feel like there are 2 points embedded in there. I do think that it's partly the responsibility of the CELTA trainer, and this is something that I feel really strongly about, that I think we don't talk about enough when it comes to CELTA courses, is that CELTA is really an emotional experience. And I think we forget that. I think it's easy for trainers to forget that when they've marked, the same kind of assignment 100 times and they've taught the same input session 100 times. And they've seen similar types of candidates come through and make the same mistakes. Every course we know there's these sort of typical things that candidates are going to do that we're going to have to sort of break them of these bad habits that they come in with. And all that's fair. But it's easy to forget that CELTA is this very emotional experience of people coming in with something that they really love, the skill that they really want to develop, and then going through this like incredibly intense 4 weeks on the intensive course where they're not sleeping because they have to spend 8 hours a night lesson planning and they don't have time to eat properly and they haven't seen their family and friends in a month, and they're putting themselves out there and standing up and trying to do this brand new skill in front of a group of people that's critiquing them. Like, that's intense. And I've had so many courses where I have, 50-year-old men like breaking down in tears in the feedback session, like, the lesson wasn't even that bad. Like, why am I crying? It's like, because this is an emotional
there's an aspect of identity that's wrapped up into teaching. Like, especially if you're like, well, I can always rely on, being able to be a little bit more energetic, and then the feedback is tone it down a little bit. You're like, well,
Right.
that's not the practice you're talking about. That's me. That's me.
Exactly. Yeah. So as a trainer, that's something that I find kind of rewarding and also challenging about my job is to take like, okay, we know that you need to lower your teacher talk. Like that's a thing because if the students don't have any time to talk in the lesson, their speaking is not improving. So we got to figure that out. But at the same time, how do we do that without losing your personality of being this person that's, very boisterous and excited and wants to share about yourself? So it's finding that balance. And I do think if you're not careful with it, the CELTA course can kind of like beat the spirit out of teachers. That's true. And that's something that a lot of trainers have started talking about, and something that I've really been thinking about since I've started developing my own teacher training courses, is that, it doesn't have to be like that. Like it needs to be this practical hands-on training experience, and it's going to be emotional no matter what anytime you're learning a new skill that you're really excited about. But it doesn't have to be this like grueling, boot camp. You don't have time to sleep, and at the end of it you feel like you just came through this horrible tumultuous experience and you're so happy you got through it, but you can't really remember anything you've learned because half of it was borderline traumatic. Like it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, you make it. When you say boot camp, I really think you nailed it on the head. It's like sometimes if it gets overly prescriptive and the teacher trainers aren't really taking into account that you're dealing with people, you end up like some sort of army regiment where you end up with a bunch of jarheads basically. Jarhead teachers just like walking around into a classroom, presentation, practice, production,
Right.
presentation.
Right. Yeah. I will say, like, there is something good about that. I will say, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but because I've told a lot of candidates this when they're kind of in the trenches and they're feeling like, why do I have to list my anticipated problems on my lesson plan again? Like, I hate this. I know, but if, I've made that analogy many times of it's like teaching boot camp where the goal is to kind of put you through these rigorous drills over and over to build up your teaching muscles so that by the time you're done, it's automatic. You don't have to think about what do I do next. You don't have to spend 12 hours like, should I do this activity or this activity? Because you just know, like those muscles are there. And I think there is something beneficial to that, where by the time you're at that point, you can say, now I can have fun with it. Like now I know the framework back and front. And so I can really start to play with it. Be like, well, what if I tweaked this and I did that? And I yeah, that's where the jazz happens.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. They talk about PPP. I actually have the 6 Ps, which is proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. So that you can take that.
That quote the other day and it escaped me. So thank you.
Yeah, it's that's a British Special Forces, I think, thing or something like that. I can't remember, but yeah, no, I agree because it's a muscle, and the more that you train it, the more you build it up. There's an element of confidence that you get with really good planning that you can't get, but you also have to be able to think on your feet and be very dynamic as soon as you get out there, and that's something that I would really like for them to teach in a CELTA course, would be to have a whole bunch of classes where they go, oh, you plan all this stuff out, and then maybe one class towards the end where they just hand you like a file as you're walking into the class, and then you open the file and there's nothing in there. And there's 5 children holding knives or something. Then you go, okay, now teach them.
Surprise! Like surprise. Yeah.
Because it happened to me all the time. Just this teacher's gone in sick. We need you to teach this class in 15 minutes. Here's what they had planned. What is this?
It's like a
haiku
dog or something.
Yeah. So you go in, but luckily, you get to the point where you're experienced and you go, okay, well, I can just go in and, we can take it from there. You know, it doesn't stress me out at all now. But yeah, I'd love to see that trained in.
Harmer calls it the corridor lesson, doesn't he? Where
is that the term?
Yeah, he says you're planning the class in your head while you walk through the corridor to the classroom. And he actually says he recommends that at some point teachers do it, because you do discover new things when you do that.
Absolutely. So this is an aside, but my co-founder of TEFL Horizons, Lauren Harrington, and a very, very good friend of mine, she and I were CELTA trainers together at the DC Center for a long time. That's how we came to be so close. But she called it the Master Chef Challenge at the end of CELTA. It was like the Master CELTA lesson planning challenge. And she had, like, the whole the cloche thing that they would use. They pull up like the secret ingredient. And so they would have to, she'd divide the candidates into teams, and they would have to plan a lesson based on whatever was under there in 10 or 15 minutes. Sometimes it would just be a picture or an article or an object. It was pretty fun.
That's what they need. That's exactly what they need, because that's what you get. That's what you get when you are out in the field. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it could be very nice, couldn't it, if like you sort of get your results and everyone's passed and da. But then there's like a final day or something, which is still a requirement of the course. So, you have to attend, and that's when they pull that out, because then you kind of haven't quite got the stress of, if you mess this up, there's the end of, there's the end of your CELTA. But you do have to think on your feet. So,
Yeah. And that was an input session, to be fair. That wasn't an actual lesson with students. It was just the planning bit. But that would be so fun to do one final, like, TP9. Surprise.
One of the interesting things that I've come to realize, and for me it did take until I did my diploma pretty much to come to this, and even afterwards to come to these sorts of realizations. But many of the things that teachers initially come into the CELTA with and dislike the most end up being the things that you appreciate as being the most useful. The two that specifically come to mind right now are being observed and observing, and, as you said before, talking about rationale and problems and solutions. I think that's probably they're probably the two things that have had the greatest positive effect on my teaching over time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Observing and being observed, I think it's something that teachers at first feel so, I don't know, uncomfortable about or nervous about, and then it becomes so beneficial. And I can't stress enough how much more I learned and how much better of a teacher I became once I became a trainer and started watching all these other lessons, because getting that objective perspective of what's happening in the classroom in front of you is amazing. And being observed as well, and getting feedback. And, even now, like, I still teach demo lessons sometimes, and we'll have trainees observing me or teachers in training, and they notice things that I don't think about even now. So it's really invaluable.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's one of the things that we try to do alongside doing these interviews and looking at methodology. We do reacts. It's not we use that term because it seems to be more popular on YouTube, but really they're lesson observations. So we're giving lesson observations to like Walter White and Mr. Kimball from Kindergarten Cop or something like that. What does good, what's good, what does what's good about it, what's bad about it, all that sort of stuff. And we also use clips from real teachers as well, because you learn a lot from observing, and not just from being observed, but from doing the observation as well. And I think we've garnered quite a lot from the past couple of years of looking at
I think when it comes to
I have
it's surprising. It's surprising just the it's surprising what people will upload onto YouTube, I think, when it comes to real teachers, like, because we've seen some real clangers, and it's like, I always think when you're getting observed in a person, you sort of, I don't know, you feel that you have to step it up a bit. It's not just your 9-to-5 class. When you get observed, you have to show what you're best capable of. And I think most people understand that. But for some reason, when it comes to putting videos on YouTube, they don't. So I think we've seen quite a lot of lessons which are,
About
kind of
75 right now.
mediocre, and then you occasionally get one that's really good, don't you? We occasionally get some we're just like, oh, this is brilliant. Yeah, so it's been interesting.
Some of it is hilarious. Like when you watch Yoda, we watched Yoda. Teaching being a Jedi. Just it's a bit it's fun. It's a fun episode, but
Yoda's a terrible
he's
teacher.
a terrible teacher. I can't remember what he said. Yeah.
He just basically says, like, believe and do it, and Luke like asks him these questions, and he's just like, you shouldn't be asking those questions.
No, he gives him a dig.
Yoda.
Yeah, nothing. And he just, the way, I can't remember.
Yeah, he
I
says,
have to watch it, so.
Luke says something like, you ask this is so difficult, I don't understand. And
Oh
Yoda
no,
just
he
goes,
shows him. He
"That
goes,
is why you fail."
yeah, he does it. Says, it's easy. He goes, that is why you failed. And we're just like, imagine doing that as like a teacher trainer, and you just demonstrate what someone's just done wrong, and then go, and that's why you're shit. Sorry, it always gets to me. So
That's amazing.
I really like the name TEFL Horizons. And I think it's very apt for what you're doing, because you're doing online certification, and this is very new within teaching English, teaching online at all, I guess. And I like, because Horizon for me is like it's the in between the ground and the sky. It's in between the offline and the online. I don't know if that was, well, of course it was thought out, but I was like,
Not with the
damn.
online, actually. That was a happy coincidence, but with that feeling, yes.
Right, yeah, but yeah, it's very apt, and I kind of want to get into that a little bit now.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I see as being in conflict with teaching online is that there's a lot of restrictions with the technology, but the more is, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. So when I was teaching in China for a while before the pandemic, before we started all of this, and it was already happening online in China, and it was great. It was phenomenal. They were, you had these companies like Magic Ears and VIP Kids and Happy Giraffe and Solemn Salamander, whatever, whatever they're called. But they helped students in rural areas get English for very cheap online, and I was like, this is going to be huge. It's going to be fantastic. And I had a bunch of friends start teaching with them, and they were experienced teachers, and they go in and then they get given a set of slides, and they just click through the slides, and they deliver the lesson, but it's like, you repeat back to me, or what is this, and it's very well structured and everything, but there was the comment back to me was always that there was no skill involved really with it. It was the materials, and then now it's kind of coming, and we've got teachers coming online, like Rich moved completely online, and he's very skilled teacher, and he's very skilled online, but I'm finding it hard to reconcile between this industry that just can pump out these really colorful, fantastic materials with all the bells and whistles, and have insert a person as a teacher or instructor, versus like what you or Rich does. How do we merge those? How do we keep them separate? Are they separate? do you have any thoughts around that? I'm still organizing it in
I
my
think
head.
so, yeah. The first, I mean, full disclosure, I really don't teach young learners. That's not really my
Yeah.
niche or my jam or anything like that. I'm almost like I'm borderline terrified of children. It's just not my thing. So everybody who follows TEFL Horizons is like, don't ask her questions about kids. But anyway, so I can't really speak to that. I know there is
Mhm.
this whole other industry that I don't even know, much about, this sort of edutainment industry that's so big in a lot of places where it is like bunny ears and puppets and colorful slides. And so I can't really speak much to that. But I guess what you're asking is sort of how do we merge like the convenience of online and still preserve the pedagogy or
Yeah,
the
how
effectiveness of the methodology?
why? Okay, I think it comes from this perspective. You've got someone that wants to change their career. They want to become an English teacher, and they
Yeah.
want to become it online. They can go and do online certification, and look for students or get students from italki or whatever,
Yeah.
or and they spend all this time planning lessons and stuff like that, or they can just like log into whatever you know uh, terrified tarantula whatever it is, and then just click through a bunch of slides. How do they make that choice?
I see what you're saying. I think that is a choice. And I think that's what we used to think of online teaching as was the strictly, magic ears, kids in front of the screen, click through, and it wasn't real. I mean, I thought that in a
Yeah.
lot of ways before I started teaching online, before the pandemic, was that, online teaching was a last resort for the
Yeah.
students and for the teachers. That, I need to make some extra money, and so I'm willing to get up at 3 a.m. and teach kids in China online, and I don't really have to do much. So that was a choice that you could make. And I surprised myself, I think, in how quickly that feeling went away when I started teaching online,
Mhm.
and how real it is, I guess I could say. And I do love in-person teaching, and I do miss a lot of things about in-person teaching, but there are so many benefits to online teaching that I hadn't even thought about or considered that, it's really surprised me. And I think maybe the difference is in what you want, as a teacher,
Mm.
and yeah, what you're looking for, how serious you are about it, how much money you want to make, frankly, how ambitious you are. Because I think at this point, there's probably a saturation to some extent on some of those platforms, especially now with all the restrictions in China. And, a lot of them have gone under, and you can't just
Well, it's
teach.
I actually have some insider info with this.
That's good.
The the problem with what's happening in China actually right now is there's a complete glut of English teachers because they can't bring them in because they closed all the extra centers,
Hmm.
and so a lot of the teachers left during the pandemic, and then they realized that actually a lot of these centers were acting also as kind of like daycares or additional English help. Like the English levels were starting to go down. When they
Right.
did the reports, they were like, well, yeah, they're not doing all this additional English work with like native speakers and stuff. But so they started to allow people to do it again, yet there's no teachers there anymore. And in addition, they banned companies, like jumping jumping Jigglypuff, from operating in China unless they were actually residing in China. So you couldn't have one
Okay.
from Vietnam operating in China. You have to be in
Yeah.
China along with your teacher as well. So there are the teachers I know that are currently in China right now that are doing online. They are absolutely making bank, insane amounts of money from all I've been hearing, and it's actually very interesting as well because they aren't using platforms. They're actually teaching online, via like WeChat. They're creating their own
Yeah.
courses.
Yep.
So they're fighting back. Yeah, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, there's no YouTube in China, but I don't know if you get Apple Podcasts. I wasn't listening to podcasts in China, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And isn't that interesting that this is for me the biggest sort of it's almost like a revolution of our industry with online teaching, that it took a second for it to sink in for me. Of that, I think my thinking was, oh, this is really convenient for both the teacher and the student that we can do this online, and that
Mm.
very quickly transformed into, this is a new era of what I like to call TEFLpreneurship, right?
Mm.
Where these teachers don't need to rely on companies anymore
Yep.
that are going to pay them limited wages, and they have this cap on how much they can earn, and how much planning they're expected to do and how much time they have to put into it. And I know a lot of language schools that don't always pay on time, and all these things that teachers have kind of been putting up with for years and years. Everybody has all these stories. Suddenly we don't really need them anymore, because we can do things like market directly to students and say, let's meet
Mm.
on Zoom. Like, every single teacher now has their very own virtual classroom and can do whatever they want with it. Which is kind of mind blowing if I start to think about it, that this is completely different than where we used to be in the
It's
industry. So yeah.
it's very much a double-edged sword, isn't it? It is
Mm-hmm.
to some extent, and I was kind of at the, the 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 boundary of it when it happened. I was applying for academic management jobs in Brighton in late 2019. And I mean, like November, December 2019. I was
Mm-hmm.
going for interviews in January 2020. Um, yeah, you can kind of imagine what happens next.
Right.
But anyway, what happens next happened next, and uh, obviously, I actually had a job offer, and they sort of said, "Oh, sorry, we're going to put that on hold for a bit." And obviously that
Yeah.
never starts. Funnily enough, they contacted me 2 years later and said, "Are you still interested?" I was like, "Well,
Now
I've
then.
kind of changed what I'm doing right now."
Right.
Yeah, so that happened, and I kind of jumped online, and I went through one of those recruitment processes of the platforms. I can't remember if it was Preply or italki or whatever. It was one of them, and they were already like paint by numbers. They went in there, and there was like kind of an induction with like at least 100 other teachers, like people just, and everyone just appeared. And the email that they sent out didn't really indicate that. It spoke about an induction or something. And you could see that people have kind of turned up. Some people are dressed up and they had their notepad, and other people were just
Yeah.
in their pajamas or whatever, because no one really knew what was happening. And everyone kind of got muted and turned off. And then the guy just kind of ran through it and said, it doesn't matter what you've done until now, nobody knows, you're going to have to kind of work your way up, and here's some advice and stuff. And it completely shut me off. Like, listening to it, I was just like,
This is
this isn't
fascinating.
for me. I am not going into this. This is like the Wild West. So I kind of looked into other avenues. I got kind of lucky with a few opportunities that come up with companies, actually. So and at the moment, I'm kind of between balancing that kind of self-employed slash company work at the same time, and sort of
Yes.
having fingers in lots of pies. But there's definitely an element of this, as you call it, TEFLpreneur. I think Neil wants to coin the phrase teacherpreneur. This is definitely the era of that, and we've come across a few people like that, and the ones that have done really well have been those that have grabbed the bull by the horns and, and,
Yeah.
and really gone for it. And there's loads of teachers out there who weren't prepared to have to, sell themselves, market themselves, and kind
Right.
of really take control of their kind of path as a teacher.
Exactly. And it's not for everybody, and it's totally fine if what you want to do is work for a company full time, or work for those platforms. Like, I know teachers who really like working for italki, and have kind of mastered it. It's almost a skill in and of itself, of like how to kind of master the platform, and how do you attract students and stand out from the competition, and how do you find that magic rate that people are going to pay where you're still making decent money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, if you like that and you're good at that, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't mean to, dump on language schools or platforms or anything like that. I just think it's amazing that we have this opportunity for the teachers who want it. It's there, and it is a different skill set in some ways, that not only do you need the methodology, but you need this sort of separate business skill set now of being able to market yourself to students. And then once you do find students, that's another animal, right? Because you're not now just being handed a syllabus and a course book and a schedule.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know how to do all of that on your own and be able to either plan a group class if that's what you want, or have a student come to you and say, okay, I want to learn with you for 6 months and here are my goals. And, or not. Students often don't even know what they want and what their goals are. And you need to be able to get that information out of them and do a needs analysis and a placement test and all of those things.
So is this all that do you cover all of this in your
Yes.
online certification?
Yep, exactly. So this is what I'm now really passionate about doing. And that last bit is something that I developed a bit later. I think I ran the course, maybe I did a couple of cohorts where I had sort of one module at the end that covered that. And I very quickly realized and was getting feedback from
Whoa.
teachers like, this is, yeah, more of that, please, and all of the questions. So I built it out into 2 separate modules. We do, so basically it's 10 modules. Modules 1 through 8 are all about how to teach different types of lessons online, and sort of all the fundamentals, how do you make the technology work for you, not against you, all of that good stuff. And then we talk about a whole lot about analyzing students' needs, course planning, how do you find materials, how do you adapt materials, and then the whole last module is just the business stuff. So how do you market yourself, how do you find students, how much do you charge, how do you take payments, how do students pay you if they're in another country?
Yeah, how do you
All of
deal
that.
with students that are different going through administrative stuff with
Exactly.
someone that's their language level? Well, their language level, but it's not at the level of doing administrative stuff. So, yeah, it's a whole. So I'm really glad that gets covered. And it sounds like there's a whole. I don't know how you fit it all into 10 modules, because my mind boggles, because the amount of information that you need. Because like, what? How many hours is the CELTA course, and then
Right.
how are you doing that online?
120 CELTA.
Yeah, they say
120
120 of like contact hours, and then they estimate that it's at least that again in terms of the amount that you do outside of class. So it's a lot of videos, and it's long videos. My trainees like them, but they always say, yeah, I got my tea, I got my coffee and my popcorn, and I settled in to watch some of those. But
I've got sort of a 2-dimensional question, I suppose. But it's one of those questions I think people always sort of ask. And so, as someone who is definitely an online teaching enthusiast, and like you, I also miss face-to-face teaching. I would like to do some again at some point, but for the last 3 years I haven't been. I don't get to do, because I do operate more or less self-employed. I work with a company on one thing. I just did a pre-sessional English course with Queen's University Belfast. So I do these occasional little bits and bobs where you get like a tiny little bit of, there's an OBS at one point, you get a bit of feedback. But I haven't really had much of a chance to see what's going on in people's online classrooms. So it does always interest me when we get to speak to people like yourself who, have seen quite a bit of that, and to talk about the kind of things that you see. Are there any sort of really interesting and kind of, I don't know, what would the word be, like unintuitive but really kind of useful online activities you've seen? Like, one that I come across recently was a thing called the Fishbowl, which I'd never. Apparently, you can use it in person as well, but I'd never used it in person. It's the idea that you have a group class, and you sort of rather than using breakout rooms to separate people into groups, then you have your group in the middle, and the rest of the class are kind of silent observers. and then you sort of swap in and out the students there. And I found that teaching on Teams, teaching the pre-session on Teams, that was fantastic. It was actually in some ways superior to breakout rooms because they were a monolingual class. They all spoke the same L1, so that whenever I opened up breakout rooms, they just went straight into L1. So the fishbowl was superior in that way. Are there any little nuggets like that that you could talk about?
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe the one thing that comes to mind that can be counterintuitive is that I think more tech tends to equal less effective. And so I think sometimes when people they automatically want to go to, oh, we're online, so that means we have to use all the tech tools we can. And they're trying to do Kahoot and Quizlet and Jamboard and all of these things in the
Right.
same lesson, and it ends up being this kind of like chaotic storm of now do
Yeah.
this activity, now click on this link, and now and I think you can get so much further. Like those are some really great tools, um, but they need to really be used kind of sparingly and the right way. And so often it's more effective to just have a simple PowerPoint slide with an activity, take a screenshot. All right, now go and do it. Like that's just as effective.
Yeah.
That's one thing I think that I think of immediately.
So keeping it kind of like low tech, high teacher. I'm
Yeah,
trying to keep it jargony.
right.
It's always going to be high tech, isn't it? But it's sort of, it's not getting overloaded with the options because there are lots of them. There's tons
Yeah.
of whiteboard software. There's pollings. There's all kinds of polling software you can use. There's quizzes. I mean, ironically, I don't think I've used Quizlet or Kahoot since I started
No,
teaching online,
I
but I used
haven't.
to use it quite a bit in person, which is pretty funny
Right.
really. But I haven't found the need. I mean, there's other things that I've been doing instead, and it's like you say, you don't want to. If you throw too many ingredients into the soup, then help me out, Neil.
Exactly. Do a lot with a little rather than trying to do a
that's
little with a
that's
lot.
it. That's it. That's it.
Yeah, yeah, that's a motto I tell my trainees a lot, and I used to use it with methodology. I still do, right? Like teach a lot about a little rather than a little about a lot, because that's a mistake that new teachers often make is thinking, oh, I have this whole hour to fill. Clearly, I need 20 different activities, and I'm just going to do them all in a row. That
Here's a
doesn't really
chicken.
make any sense. Yeah, exactly. Now do another thing, but we can take one article and build an entire 1 hour lesson around it where we really get the most mileage possible out of that one piece of material. And you want to do the same thing with the tech, I think, of getting the most
Yeah.
mileage out of a few really well used tools rather than
Yeah.
just throwing a bunch of bells and whistles at
Yeah,
the
I think
students.
the same applies offline as well.
Yeah.
I wanna throw us into the future and look back. So one of the things when I first got started, I actually started. I was teaching with Callan method. I was doing direct method, and then I did my CELTA after and started to do more CLT after. And with the channel that we have, we focus a lot on different methodologies. And one of the things that's been percolating in my mind is we've got all these companies, the Magic Ears, they've got their own little materials that they do, and iTalki and Preply that have their own way of doing classes. And I was thinking, well, maybe we can start to refer to these as methodologies because Callan method, is its own. We've recently looked at Berlitz and Inling where they have their own methods, right? And
Right.
Callan method is literally the direct method. And I'm wondering, what if we were teachers, trainers in the future, or linguists or professors, and we're looking back at the online teaching right now, what would be that methodology for teaching online? Do you have any thoughts around that? I think a good starting point is what you mentioned in doing a lot with a little, which I find quite counterintuitive, but I completely
Yeah.
agree with. But would you say that there is a form, an online method of teaching forming? Is there multiple branches? Is it going to be like we're all going to converge from the Suggestopedia silent way to come up with like this CLT of online? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts around that space?
Wow, that's a fascinating question, and I don't know if I could nail down my thoughts quickly enough to get to a good answer. But
What do you mean?
I don't know, because I don't even know that teaching online is a method, right? It's just a platform, it's just a space. So I think that you could have many different methods still work online. Like you can have this sort of very communicative method. You could do, yeah, depending on how you use the tools, you really do have a lot more capabilities in some ways that you have. Audio and video recording is already happening, right? In the classroom in a
Yeah.
way that isn't in a in-person classroom. So you could play with that and do all kinds of like community language learning type things of
That is
building
very true,
scripts
yes.
and dialogues and you know making little videos and then editing them and then like there's a ton you could do if you wanted to get really kind of
Yeah.
experimental and creative with this fact that we're already doing audio and video, whereas in the classroom trying to like in a physical classroom trying to get students to like pull out their phones and make a video is a very sort of shift, which online we're already there. So there's that, but then there's also you could just keep it just a very straight, normal, communicative method. Talk to your partner in breakout rooms, which is what I typically do for group classes, where it's really no different than what's happening in the physical classroom. We just happen to be online. So I think maybe online gives us more flexibility rather than sort of is its own method, I guess is where my conclusion
One
is
of the things that
going.
I've always found very different about online is the kind of power the teacher has in terms of controlling the audio visual experience of the
Yeah.
student. You can quite easily take over their screen with
Yeah.
whatever, right? And
Yeah.
Richard's
start like,
breaking out as Tyler
yeah,
Durden.
yeah,
Gonna start
shaking,
inserting subliminal
Power.
messages.
and you
You
start
like grammar.
you start blasting.
Yeah, just grammar points every like one frame of the 24 frames or something.
If they get it wrong, you play like the really loud like fingers on the chalkboard.
Barney or something.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause, you've got students as well who are wearing headphones, so they can feel quite sort of plugged in, I think, to whatever
Yeah.
you're kind of putting on. And I found that interesting. I think that in some ways it actually keeps students a bit more focused when you're, for example, playing a video or something, because like it's right there, at least initially. Obviously, after
Right.
like 5 minutes, they can tab out and start using WhatsApp web or whatever else they're tapping away on in the background, right? But yeah.
Yeah, I think about that too. And I think especially with younger students, not necessarily young learners, but people who are in their early 20s now, maybe who grew up on the screen in so many more ways than I did. Like I just didn't have the same amount of screen time because we didn't have really the internet like this when I was a child. I wasn't on a smartphone. Um, and so I do think there's this draw for younger students, especially of like it's natural for them to gravitate to the technology and things on the screen. For me, my first instinct is something on the screen is less real than something in person, or less important or less valuable. But I think for them, it's almost the opposite. That's like in this age of YouTubers and ordinary people being able to put everything online and they can absorb so much media that way. Like it's almost like they gravitate more. It's more important what that you're teaching them on the screen than if you're teaching them in the real classroom. So there is that aspect as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much going on, and there's so much change. It's kind of like a big dust cloud right now, and we're waiting for it to settle down. But it's good that we have people like yourself, especially for teachers, that can give some more guidance based on your experience as a teacher trainer and translating that to online. But it's difficult for everyone because it's one of the things that I think a lot of people find, a lot of teachers especially find difficult is how do you judge on what is the right or wrong way to teach online, because it's new for everyone. So everyone's claimed to be an expert, then how do they deal with that? And I always direct them towards people like yourself. I'm like, well, go with the those teacher trainers that are very experienced, that you know they would more readily be able to translate it onto to online.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Um, it's a learning curve for sure. And I think, there are so many differences with online teaching, but the fundamentals are still the same. At the end of the day, it always comes
Exactly.
down to the students. And so, you know, however we approach it, the crux of it is always, well, what are our students getting out of this? How is this helping our students improve their language abilities in the way that they want? Yeah, so going with a course or a trainer or a training program that's going to help you figure that out and really kind of what to do, but also the whys behind what you're doing is important.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to have to wrap this up now, as I have to go and see a man about a dog. Uh, I'm always going every week to try and find this damn dog. So what I would like you to do is to I'll give you the floor, and you just let our viewers, our listeners, know how to get in touch with you, how to find you, give all your links, and if you have any final thoughts that you would like to share, go ahead. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, this has been a pleasure. If you want to come and find me, get in touch with me, learn more about what I do, the website is TEFLhorizons.com. So that's a great place to start. I do pretty regular free webinars, and that's also a great place to get some kind of free training and a little bit of a taste of what I do and kind of my approach to teaching. So anybody who's interested in learning more about how to be a better online teacher, that's a fantastic place to start. And that's TEFLhorizons.com/webinars. But
Mm.
basically, if you sign up for anything on my website, you'll end up on my email address list. And so then you'll get notifications if there's, anything exciting happening, like a webinar series. Uh, Instagram is TEFL_Horizons. I think I'm trying to be more on Instagram. So come follow me so that I feel pressured to post more to anyone who's listening. um, I don't have a YouTube presence yet, but that will be happening in the not too distant future, I hope. And yeah, I guess final thoughts is for me, this is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but being able to go online really has changed my life. I love teaching, I love training, but I think we've all had that experience of loving what we do and being kind of like locked into what we do. Like teachers aren't really taken care of a lot of the time in terms of getting a really good living wage, in terms of getting paid time off, in terms of getting any time off,
Yeah.
in terms of being able to do normal things like take vacations when we want to. It's often our schedules are really set by these kind of external forces, which is so antithetical to why most of us got into this field in the first place, is because we're all these kind of like free spirited adventurers who want to travel and see the world and connect with people. And then we end up in these jobs where it's like, you can take 1 week off in the summer and you're not getting paid for it. So, have fun with that.
Yeah.
Um, Not to be negative, but like that's where a
It's
lot of
true.
us have found ourselves. And the more successful we get within these organizations, the less teaching we actually get to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we start doing admin and, other things that we're not as passionate about. So there's like this weird ceiling as well. So being able to go online has completely changed all of that for me, that I can now set my own hours and prices, and there's no cap on the amount of money that I can make if I get really creative with what I can offer and how I can offer it. And that's, for me, that's the experience that I want other teachers to have if they want it. So that's what I'm passionate about. And I think with all of that, we're sort of moving away from this era of needing to have the right piece of paper into needing to have the right skill set. And so if you're a teacher, I think that's what you really want to ask yourself is, what do you really want in terms of sort of designing your ideal situation? And then what's the skill set that you need in order to have that, to build that for yourself? And where can you go to get those skills? Um, so that's what I would say. That's something, questions that I started to ask myself, and very happy with, how that's going. There's always more to learn, but
Oh,
yeah.
excellent, excellent, and I wholeheartedly agree with all your points. Thank you ever so much for coming on the show.
Well,
Yeah, thank
so
you,
much
Shannon.
for
It was absolutely wonderful. Yeah, very, very interesting conversation.
If you're looking for more information from myself, you can go to teamteacherchina.com. We've got a whole bunch of materials, PowerPoints that you can use instantly in the classroom. We've got a Team Teacher China YouTube channel where we have videos teaching you how to use those materials. Team Teacher English, where we put those materials into a video form for self-study. And Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience as a teacher and put that into parenting.
And go to youtube.com/Professor Rich to see some English teaching. You can catch me weekly live streams on Oxford Online English YouTube channel. Oh, and also you can do a YouTube search for POG Space UK, and you would get my alpha version of my new gaming channel, which actually just have some trial content on there at the moment. You can email us here at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to contribute to the show.
Smash that like button, share and subscribe.
And watch 100% of the video and don't click
Exactly.
off. Thank you.
Bye.